Mikhail Tal's queen sacrifices are legendary. In today's game against the Bulgarian grandmaster Milko Bobotsov, Tal offers his queen for only 2 minor pieces and a pawn. However, despite his reduced forces, it seems always that it is his army that is dominating the board. d4 opens the game and Tal responds with the King's Indian defense, naturally something that quite suits his style. At this point, Milko plays the move knight ge2, which I find to be maybe not the most optimal move. More popular is bishop e3, which feels a little bit more natural. Still, knight ge2 is okay if after c5 here d5 is played. d5 would close the position in a way that is probably favorable to white, and the knight makes sense on e2 in this position, and Tal probably needs to play e6 and enter a Benoni style defense. Perhaps Bobotsov didn't want to enter a Benoni because Tal had recently won fantastic and brilliant games in the Benoni defense, but in this game he's going to win a fantastic game in the King's Indian defense, so we learned that picking your opening against Tal isn't really going to work. He's going to create challenges no matter how you choose to play against him. In any case, after knight ge2, c5 is played by Tal, and Bobotsov responds with bishop e3. Knight bd7 now from Tal is maybe a little bit questionable. Instead, more natural is knight c6, putting more pressure on d4. This has actually been quite theoretical in modern times, and white is now able to pick up a pawn sacrifice for which it seems that black gets good counterplay due to active and more naturally placed pieces, although this is all really quite complicated. After knight bd7, Bobotsov responds with queen d2. Maybe again d5 closing the position made some sense. And now Tal starts playing for some interesting counterplay. a6, and after castles, maybe already good was pawn b5, a move that Tal plays on the next turn. His move is setting up a queen sacrifice, but Bobotsov could have responded effectively against the move. Queen to a5 in this position, and now king to b1 and then b5. So in this position, Bobotsov responds with knight d5. Perhaps he's anticipating that Tal has actually walked into a trap. Now, I want to come back here in just a second and then we'll look at what Tal does. But playing for this idea, but changing the move order could have been a really effective way to respond. So Bobotsov could have responded here with d takes c5, and after the natural knight captures on c5, he could have eliminated the bishop on e3 that's hanging in a critical variation in just a moment. So if he trades the bishop on e3 here, then he can go for knight d5 and not allow Tal the counterplay that he got in the game. However, that isn't what happens, and after knight d5, knight takes d5 here is a really nice queen sacrifice, one of Tal's most beautiful queen sacrifices. Now, often we consider Tal to be a speculative, even an unsound player, but I really think that this queen sacrifice is quite sound, and even the top level grandmasters today would go for this sacrifice in a heartbeat. After knight takes d5, of course Bobotsov captures Tal's queen over here on a5, and Tal captures here on e3. At this point, he's picked up a knight on d5 and a bishop on e3 for the queen, 6 points, but he's also hitting the rook on d1 and the pawn on c4, which he's about to capture, so he'll pick up a pawn in the bargain as well. I think that this is quite enough compensation here, especially when you look at the pieces on the board and anticipate Tal's ability to open up lines on the queen side and just how strong this unopposed dark squared bishop is. An unopposed bishop in the right situation is a tremendously powerful piece, and this piece is going to be a monster in this game. So Bobotsov plays the natural rook to c1, the most natural square to move the rook to, I think, and we get knight takes c4, hitting the queen. Now, the queen could have run away, but I think, again, we're going to get really, really good counterplay for black here. For example, what I like is swinging the other knight in and then hitting in with knight a4, piling everything up on this b2 square. This is a really, really nice line, but there are lots of alternatives, and who can say how Tal would have played. Rook takes c4 instead from Bobotsov gives back the exchange, allowing Tal to close the material gap right away, but he's at least getting rid of this really strong knight on c4, and he's trying to simplify the position. I really understand what he's doing, but I think that he's giving Tal a little bit too much here. He's trying so hard to reduce Tal's counterplay, but he's never really getting any counterplay for himself. When your opponent sacrifices, you have to try to remain active. You cannot bend to his will, and I really feel that Bobotsov around here is adopting a defensive mindset and letting Tal run the board. So after rook takes c4, of course we recapture, and now knight to c1. And I think that this is a big mistake. Stockfish is screaming that it's a big mistake, but it's just so passive. Where is the knight going to go from here? More natural is knight to f4, which also allows this bishop to be opened up, but now this knight might get into d5, which is much more promising. We also have chances to hopefully get some counterplay over here on the king side, although that's going to be very difficult as black's play does come really quickly. We just can't let black be the only one attacking here. So knight c1 and then rook b8 opening up on the b file, which is going to be a huge point of attack, of course. Bishop takes c4, knight to b6, developing the knight to a better square and hitting the bishop with a gain of time. At this point, you could capture this loose pawn on a6, but it just feels like you're opening up more lines of attack for black. Does black really need an open a file to work with as well as the b file? So the bishop falls back to b3 here, but of course it's still a target and c4 is a major idea. Tal just goes ahead and grabs on d4. At this point, I don't think he's feeling any rush. He's controlling the board. Yes, he's playing without the queen, but he has enough material for it at this point. So he's just going to calmly capture on d4 and let the attack develop naturally. No need to rush. So bishop takes d4, queen to d2. Bishop just falls back to g7 so that the c-pawn can advance without hanging the bishop. Knight to e2, trying to get the knight to c3 and close down the diagonal a little bit. Pawn c4, pushing the bishop back, and then pawn c3. A nice move, not too hard, but things are opened up here. At this point, if you capture on c3, of course the black knight hops into c4, and this is just a disaster. Material is immediately falling, and you'll be lucky if you don't get checkmated at this point. So after c3, instead the pawn is left alone. The queen steps up to d3, and Tal goes ahead and captures on b2. This pawn is one square away from queening. Obviously, it is a monster pawn, and again, at this point, Tal has essentially enough material for the queen. He's short 1 point, but obviously that doesn't matter. His position is crushing. Knight d4 now, bishop to d7, developing the bishop and getting ready to swing the other rook in. Very nice. Rook to d1, rook f to c8, and now I like the following line and I want to share it. If the queen captures on a6, which is not a good move, but it's really hard to recommend good moves for white. Everything is losing, so why not try and grab a pawn at this point? I like the finish here. Bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, and rook takes c2. This all seems very natural, but after king takes c2, how do you follow up? You might pause the video here and try to find the right move. So of course the main idea is to just move this knight out of the way so that you can threaten to queen the b pawn. But where do you move it? The correct answer is knight to d5, which is really nice. And the point is that if the king falls back, you have knight c3. And if the rook steps back to stop promotion, you have knight b4, a royal fork to finish the game in style. Very nice stuff. So after rook to c8, of course, Bobotsov doesn't capture here on a6, so he plays bishop to b3 instead, trying to keep this b file closed. So after bishop b3, knight to a4, getting ready to hop in here. Ouchies. So the bishop eliminates it, but of course this bishop recaptures here. There's big ideas to introduce the bishop into c2 now. So knight b3 tries to shut off that bishop's diagonal. Rook c3, great move, supported by the bishop, and we're just encroaching, we're dominating. We grab here on b3 at this point, and now, okay, you could capture here, but we have better now. We have rook to c8, and you cannot stop me from invading here on the c file. Of course, if the king captures the pawn, we just pick up the white queen right here with a discovered check. Very nice stuff. So the queen tries to move to a better square where it's hoping to control some useful points. But we have here rook to c1, and at this point, Bobotsov resigns. Or I'm actually incorrect. He captures here on c1, and then he resigns after the other rook recaptures. Of course, it's checkmate. But after the king plays the only legal move, king to a2, you have 3 checkmates here. You might want to try and find them all. The best checkmate is definitely under promoting to a bishop with checkmate. And I really wish that Bobotsov had allowed this, and I have no doubt that Tal would have under promoted to the bishop for this beautiful, beautiful bishop checkmate facing off against the king here on a2. I hope that you've enjoyed going through this game as much as I have. If you have, then you can like and subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of future videos, and also check out the playlist with more of Tal's greatest games sitting right on top of the chessboard.